If you don't have that aggregation, it is impossible not only to give credit, it makes training much harder. Even sometimes in our case, when we're able to find some higher yield plants, it's even harder to distribute. And in some cases, the farmer needs to be trained, and we talked about. And how do you train? For example, in Ogun State, we have around 360,000 farmers. How do we talk to them? How do we accelerate the process? So first of all is the farmer. But then, as you rightly said, the processors. And the processors are not necessarily the final manufacturers. If you look at most of the raw materials, they tend to be processed. If you think about palm oil, it is processed, it is refined. If you think about flour, it is refined the same way for salt. So it needs to be processed. And you also have to take the processors into account. And then as well, as the Honorable Minister of Finance talked about, is transportation and warehousing. And you also need to be able to talk about that because you have waste. And then you get to the big manufacturers, and the big manufacturers require important quantities, and you need to be sustainable in your quantities, in your quality, over a period of time. So the only solution is to look at the value chain integrated, because as we all know, the power of a chain is in the weakest link, and if we don't look at the weakest links in the whole of the value chain, we cannot do it. And there are thousands of examples where it is possible. I mean, if you look at Nestle Nigeria today, 100% of our maize is locally produced. Golden Morn is locally produced. If you look at products such as palm oil, we have been able to help big companies to develop in Nigeria. Today, we're working with the Honorable Commissioner on cassava, transforming cassava flour and cassava starch to be able to replace cornstarch. So the opportunities are there, the players are there, the farmers are there. You have a lot of support agencies that are willing to help, IDH, USAID. You also have a lot of processors. And you have the end consumers who are us, and of course the final consumers where the products end up at the table. And the only way you can do it is by sitting down and making sure that we look at the whole value chain and that everyone makes the right profit out of it.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. I'll come back to you on how Nestle gets involved and in the value chain and the supply chain. But I would like to give everyone an opportunity to also give us some insight before we cycle back. We'll finish with Zach, and then we'll allow the Honorable Minister and Honorable Commissioner to give some input from the government side. So, Aaron, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Your Excellency, and honored panel guests. I have to concur with what all three of the previous panel guests have said, but I'd like to maybe package it in a little bit different model. We talked about access to land, but I think it's very important that we have communities that are accepting the access to land, and the communities themselves are engaged in that production for those supply chains. No agricultural system can survive unless you have active participants and willing participants to support those value chains. And I think our communities need to be engaged and getting access to community lands or working with the communities on their lands is a paramount position. And it's one of the biggest challenges that I've seen in Nigeria in the short time that I've been here. I also concur that we need to have access to good seed materials, not only seeds, but also cassava stems, and working with palm varieties that are locally developed and also are sustainable and are going to improve the production in the areas. We have started to open up what we call centers of excellence that are working with the communities, in the communities, to provide agronomic information and support that can take that yield of 1 ton of soybeans and move it to 2.5 to 3 tons with the use of technology and knowledge. It has to be done. It can be done without mechanization. And mechanization will make it easier, but it'll empower the stakeholders as well as the communities that we're in. A supply chain is not just a farmer and a processor. It's also the inputs that go into that supply chain. And we need to make sure that we have access to those ingredients, whether it's fertilizer, agricultural chemicals, seeds and technology. That whole stakeholder value chain needs to be put in place. And I think as we move forward, the greatest challenge that we will have amongst ourselves to improve the Nigerian agricultural economy is cooperation amongst ourselves. Transportation, I like the analogy of the minister before me speaking about how many truckloads of rice it is that we exported. I share experience coming down from Niger State. I saw 70 kilometers on both sides of the road with trucks that couldn't move the produce that they needed to get to market. So we need to face those challenges, and we need to be able to embrace them. And whether it's private sector that invests in the roads or for tax breaks, or whether it's individuals as a whole that, or states, governments, or the federal government does it, that's an area that needs to be addressed, and addressed quickly. One of the areas we have not talked about is our railway system. Most countries that are industrialized have a very strong railway system to move freight across the nation. I feel that, and we feel that it would be imperative that we also encompass the rail system and be able to do it. And that's where I see the challenges that we face right now in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. I just need one word from Zach, because his business is slightly different. It's a poultry business, and then we'll wrap up quickly.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this fantastic forum. Your Excellency, the Vice President, thank you for attending and to be able to listen to us. I'm representing the farming sector, the real farming sector, the livestock sector. And I've been in this country for 27 years now. And I want to share with you a little bit about the history in order to show you what opportunities we have for the future, generally in Nigeria and specifically in Ogun State. When I came to Nigeria, consumption of, I'll give you an example from my own industry, of poultry broiler meat was about 120 grams per capita per annum, trailing even behind the average African consumption. Now it's one generation after, consumption is 1.6 kilograms, so the growth in one generation was about 1,300%. And in 2025, we will double, according to our assumptions and our experience, we will double our consumption in the next 7 years. So there is a gradual but very intensified move from in human nutrition or human diet, from vegetarian-based into animal-based protein. And this is going to be a huge challenge for our industry and for our value chain, feed value chain in the future. So another revelation that I want to do here is we were welcomed by Ogun State government only in 2014. It was 3.5 years ago. But in 2015 and 2016, we proved here in Ogun State, in Ajebo village, that we could be so efficient and be recognized